the importance of section transitions. Yeah. One in particular, you all were like freaked out over. What is the purpose of a section transition?
Connects different sections together.
All right, and what visual did I use to show a connection? Yeah, that low viaduct. So you want it to be that seamless. Today I'm going to tell you about another advantage. So if you want to go from mediocre to good, use section transitions. But if you want to go from good to great, use those section transitions and a really strategic intro and conclusion. So I'm going to begin with a little slideshow, with a little video. This is a tiny, tiny little TED Talk. But I want you to hear how he gets the audience's attention and then how he concludes his brief demonstration on how to tie your shoes. Wow.
I'm used to thinking of the TED audience as a wonderful collection of some of the most effective, intelligent, intellectual, savvy, worldly, and innovative people in the world, and I think that's true. However, I also have reason to believe that many, if not most of you, are actually tying your shoes incorrectly. I know that seems ludicrous. I know that seems ludicrous, and believe me, I lived the same sad life until about 3 years ago. And what happened to me was I bought what was for me a very expensive pair of shoes, but those shoes came with round nylon laces, and I couldn't keep them tied. So I went back to the store and said to the owner, I love the shoes, but I hate the laces. He took a look and said, oh, you're tying them wrong. Now, up until that moment, I would have thought that by age 50, one of the life skills that I had really nailed was tying my shoes. But not so. Let me demonstrate. This is the way that most of us were taught to tie our shoes. Now, as it turns out, thank you. Wait, there's more. As it turns out, there's a strong form and a weak form of this knot. Now, we were taught to tie the weak form, and here's how to tell. If you pull the strands at the base of the knot, you can see that the bow will orient itself down the long axis of the shoe. That's the weak form of the knot. But not to worry. If we start over and simply go the other direction around the bow, we get this, the strong form of the knot, and if you pull the cords under the knot, you will see that the bow orients itself along the transverse axis of the shoe. This is a stronger knot. It will come untied less often. It will let you down less, and not only that, it looks better. We're going to do this one more time. Start as usual. Go the other way around the loop. This is a little hard for children, but I think you can handle it. Pull the knot. There it is, the strong form of the shoe knot. Now, in keeping with today's theme, I'd like to point out, and something you already know, that sometimes a small advantage someplace in life can yield tremendous results someplace else. Live long and prosper.
Okay, y'all, emotion, something. Give me some. I'm trying to.
I think that's how
So what?
No, I just did that question.
So did you understand what he was saying about it though? That to do the weak form, you go from your ankle to your toe. So when you undo it, see it's going along the y-axis. But strong form, so you go from toe back here to ankle. What do you think about these shoes, by the way? Be honest. Yeah, be honest. Come on, what do you think? What do you think, baby?
I want the best in taste. I want the best shoe.
These aren't?
Oh,
Very large shoes. That's all right. No. I need to know this.
Oh, my bad, my bad.
No, What do you think about these? Okay, so I tried these on in front of my daughter, my stepdaughter, and my husband. And I got the most overwhelming, oh my God, no, you can't go out of the house with those.
They're not that bad.
Are you guys saying that because you're not?
No, like I'm like they're not that bad. Be like, oh, you can't wear that outside the house.
Definitely not that bad.
Thank you, thank you. Oh my God, no, you can't wear those. And so I've been going around filming, so Dr. Ray saw it, she's like, oh, you look so cute, all of those shoes. I said, stop, I'm gonna film that. And so I recorded it and I'm gonna send it to all of these people who were hating on me. So here's the deal, thrift store buy, $7, right? And that, at that point, my daughter said, yeah, I can believe that. But I digress. We're talking about how we tie our shoes. If I were to come in today and say, guys, I'm gonna give you a presentation on how to tie your shoes. A general audience might receive that how?
Already know how to tie my shoe.
I already know how to tie my shoe.
I'm in the wrong class.
Mom, guess what we learned today?
When you first said that, like you were gonna show us the video, right? Like
Okay.
I was like, because that said, I didn't know how to do that. I think.
It's the look that Jonathan gives when he says that. Can you do that again? It's
Then, like,
It's this whole feeling of, yeah, tell me something. How did he get you to stay with him, Doug? At the beginning of his presentation, how did he get you curious enough to stick around?
Telling us that we were tying our shoes incorrectly.
when he mentioned like, I, for my 50 years, like on the planet, you'd think that's one of the life skills of have it down pat.
So what that's called is self-deprecating humor, right? It's that, all shucks kind of humor. But before that even, when he said, you've been tying them all wrong, he had to kind of decrease a lot of that skepticism in the audience, and he did that with an appeal to pride. Right out of the gate, he said, I've always thought of the TED audience as some of the most smart, influential, forward-thinking people in the United States, right? So what he's doing is appealing to their pride. And they're going, yes, we are. Yes, we are. And then he says, but you're tying your shoes wrong. What does that do? Having those right next to each other, playing off of each other, what does that do? If you're sitting in an audience and you're like, my 2 o'clock class is always the smartest. They're the most fun crowd. They're easy to get along with. We really are. Easy. I look forward to my 2 o'clock. But let me tell you what you've been doing wrong.
We're curious, like, you just had that good stuff about us. What do we do?
Now you'll listen. Because I've said all that good stuff about you. And it's a warm and fuzzy feeling. Okay, I'll listen. But if I were just to come in here at 2 o'clock on a Thursday and say, guys, you're doing it all wrong, you're not going to listen. So, number one takeaway for your introduction, you got to loosen up the defenses of your audience. Out of the gate, you're ceding some time. You're taking away the audience's most precious resource. I mean, think of everything else we could be doing today at 2:20. It's a lot of stuff. But no, you're sitting in here, and so someone's going to speak to you. You want to know right out of the gate that we're on the same ground and that I've got a message that's going to be beneficial to you. But that's got to come quickly. That's what he does. And so first he's like, let me tell you how great you are. But then I'm going to tell you, you're doing something all wrong. But the last thing he does to establish his credibility is to say, I would have thought that by 50 years old, tying my shoes was a life skill I had nailed. That self-deprecating humor says I'm in the same boat. Think of how important that is. I'm in the same boat, or I'm in a similar boat. And so let me tell you what I've learned from it. That's what it's all about with creating credibility and relevance. How are you going to do it? So we're going to talk about several different ways that we can grab our audience's attention, because the way you do that sets the tone for the entire presentation. And you know, as we mentioned last week, you don't have a whole lot of time either. So you've only got 4 to 6 minutes in this presentation. You've only got about 30 seconds really to get in and make a really good positive first impression. So you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Yeah. Y'all ever had a first impression that was totally wrong? You met someone like, oh, amazing person of my dreams. About a month later, yeah, it was a person of your dreams, but it was a nightmare, right? It's like, ugh. And then sometimes you meet some people and you're like, man, it's not a good first impression. How difficult is that to overcome? Once that first impression has landed, it's really difficult to overcome. So you don't have a whole lot of time to create that first impression. That's why what you'll hear today is I want you to write and to nearly memorize your introduction. But not only your introduction, also your conclusion. Here's why. So what's going on physiologically in your presentation is a lot of times your thoughts that you've prepared are in conflict with kind of the voices in your head that are saying, you gotta hurry up. What was that? Why did she just look that way? Why is he looking this way? You're contending with several different layers of conversation that are going on when you're up here. Furthermore, you are contending with a little bit of apprehension, whether you felt it or not. So we know that this anticipation phase, like before the presentation, like when we're just talking about it, or maybe the morning of, that anticipation phase is pretty well monitored by you, by your thoughts. You can procrastinate, or you can, turn on some music or just not think about it. But there comes a time when you come up here and it's your turn to speak. And we like to call that the confrontation phase. And what some of you told me you felt when you got up here was just like this surge of anticipation. You felt hotter. Some of you felt a little clammier. Sometimes I get splotchy up here on my neck. Sometimes you feel like you're getting short of breath. And so we'll do this, which is not the thing to do, by the way. If you feel like you're getting short of breath, breathe from that diaphragm. Make your belly bigger. All of that is a physiological response to a threat. And none of this is threatening, but in the moment, your body doesn't know that. Your body feels really vulnerable. So when that happens, your sympathetic nervous system kicks into gear. And when your body identifies a threat, that sympathetic nervous system goes into overdrive, and it says, we're going to send all of that blood supply to the outer extremities. It's evolutionary by nature. So we're going to send some extra blood down to the feet, to the hands, to your eyes and your ears. Your senses are going to be awakened. That's why you're more in tune with what's going on in the classroom at that moment. We're going to send a little less of that blood supply up here, and also a little bit less to digestion and things of that nature. So because we don't need so much to digest, your mouth is going to get dry. So physiologically, you're going to feel these things. What does that have to do with an introduction? It means because of the reduced oxygen to your brain and all of the other awareness of your senses, you're going to forget what you say. You'll get up here and be like, I had something I wanted to say, and I can't remember it. So for this speech, write it out. Your assignment for Tuesday is to write out your entire introduction and your conclusion. Because after you get through that first minute, you're going to get, oh, wait a minute, what's this worried about? Your body can't stay in that zone of anticipating a threat for a long time. You think back to the hunters and gatherers. You hear the rustling in the woods, you take off running. Or you stay put, you hunker down, right? You listen, if you don't hear anything else for a while, what begins to happen to you? Start to relax. Okay. You'll start to relax. You'll feel it. You'll feel kind of a sweet zone. And the more you do it, the more you'll say, okay, I can focus on my message now. I do have something important that's going to be helpful. And then by the end of your presentation, a lot of that adrenaline has seeped out of your body. That's just how we work. And so we start to rest and digest. So a lot of that blood flow leaves those senses, and you start to feel a little tired, a little fatigued. What happens when you're here and when you're here is that we become forgetful, and it's natural. So when you know those times are going to be when you become forgetful, physiologically, it has nothing to do with you personally. It happens to all of us. We shore that up. And you can shore that up by writing out that intro and that conclusion verbatim on a note card if you need to. My theory is that if you do that, the benefit is in the preparation. Like you're going to get up here and it's going to be like a security blanket. And if you practice with that note card, you'll know where words are on that without actually even seeing them. But it's so important to have a strategic intro and conclusion because studies show that audiences remember how a presentation begins and how it ends and a little bit in between. So, how do you grab your audience's attention? If you look at your outline, we're talking about just Roman numeral 1. How do you grab your audience's attention? That's the first thing we need to do. So before you get up here and you say, today I'm going to give you an informative speech. No. Back up. You've got to convince me, first of all, to get into this pool. It's kind of like that first warm spring day, and you're out at the river or out at the lake, and all your friends are like, hey, come on, jump in. It's hot out here. What is the temperature of that water? Just pretty cold. It's pretty cold. So you got to invite me. I've got to dip my toe in it, and then my ankle, then my knee, and I probably won't even get in until it's about 90 degrees. Announcing your topic before you grab your audience's attention is just as startling. It's just as disorienting. I'm not sure I want to go with you on this 5-minute trip. So first of all, grab your audience's attention, then reveal your topic. Then it's perfectly fine for you to say, so today, I want to tell you about the mental health crisis and how it's impacted my family. I'm going to focus in on how screen time and how sleep time are affecting our teens, and more specifically, how they affected me over the last 5 years. That's fine after you grab their attention. So how can we grab attention? I'm going to give you lots of ideas. I'm going to read some examples for you. This slide is upper level. Like this is your varsity way to grab attention. I'm gonna show you the JV level, and a lot of people use it. But if you can do one of these, you just elevated your speech. Remember, about the first 30 seconds determines, we're taking notes. Hey, this is gonna be good, or okay, it's only 5 minutes. So, relate that topic to your audience, just like our speaker did. He's like, you know, you all are in this audience, you're smart people, but you're doing it wrong, and I've been doing it wrong too. So it's that common ground. It's one thing to say you all are doing it wrong, but once he came back and he said, yeah, I thought I had that too, but turned out I wasn't doing it the right way. So that's how he relates the topic to the audience. Another thing you can do is you can take that peer review that you did for the introductory presentation, where you wrote down words, you know, to describe each person's talk. You can use that. You can reference that if you want to. You know, you can go back to somebody's photo that they may have shown and show how it relates to you or how your topic. Hey, we've got this in common. You could go back to our speed dating event that we did, and you learned things about each other. But relating the topic to the audience, it's this audience. It's us. It's not a plastic audience. And that's another reason it's important for you to do your research on your audience. So who's your audience for this one?
You.
Yeah. So do some research on Gen X. I know I look older. I know I look like a boomer, but I'm not. Boomers don't buy these shoes. So do some research on Gen X. You know, just overview characteristics that we have in common. You can also state the importance of the topic. A lot of times that can be with a statistic or with a quote, you know. But let me give you two different scenarios of beginning a presentation. You tell me which one you're willing to listen to. So if I come up here and I say, today I'm going to talk about dreams, a subject that's always fascinated me. I will first look at why we dream and then how psychologists interpret the meaning of dreams. Are y'all excited for the next 4 to 6 minutes? No? Nobody? Structurally, that gets the job done. It tells you what we're talking about, and it tells you my 2 main points. So it's there. But let's add style. You're being chased by an object of unspeakable horror, yet your legs can only move in slow motion. Each step takes unbearably long, and your frantic struggle to run faster is hopeless. Your pursuer gets closer, and your desperation turns to terror. You are completely helpless, eye to eye with death. And then you wake up, gasping for air, your heart pounding, your face clammy and sweaty. It takes a few minutes for your heart and breathing to slow down, but you reassure yourself that it was just a dream. And soon you drift back to sleep. Today, I want to tell you about dreams, right? That makes a difference. You painted a picture to begin it. So stating the importance, you could do that a number of different ways, but one of the more creative ways is to paint that picture. Take us into a place that's familiar. We've all had that feeling, right? When you're dreaming and you're like, oh my God, did that really happen? And when it didn't, you're like, yes. My recurring nightmare is getting mad at a class and kicking them out. Like just going berserk and saying, get out of here. And then I wake up and I'm like, oh, I didn't have Dr. Ray's version of that, I'll let her tell you. Y'all ask her. But her recurring thing is with her classrooms. She's much more violent. So another thing you can do is to startle your audience. So I thought this was a pretty good example that the textbook gave. And it's a little, so anytime you're talking about statistics, you want to make it real. Kind of like that video we watched last week about sharing your goals. And all of those statistics about that, the people who were in that study, and half of them spoke their goals and half didn't, it had to be reinforced visually. And so one way you can do that is by inviting your audience to visualize a statistic. On a more somber topic, take a moment and think of the 3 women closest to you. Who comes to mind? Your mother, maybe your sister, your girlfriend or your wife, your best friend. Now guess which one will be sexually assaulted during her lifetime. And it's not a pleasant thought, but according to the U.S. Department of Justice, 1 of every 3 American women will be sexually assaulted sometime during her lifetime. That makes it real. When at the beginning you say, all right, think of 3 women that are close to you. I'm not choosing that for anybody. But what the statistics show is that 1 in 3 will be sexually assaulted. That's very different than just coming up in front of an audience and saying, according to the U.S. Department of Justice, 30% of females in the United States will be sexually assaulted. That's cold. It's aloof. That's mechanical. It's not human. I can make that a number. But when I ask you, when I invite you, all right, think of 3 women closest to you. It takes on a whole new dynamic. I'm invested in, and I want to hear what you have to say. That's the way to startle your audience, by making statistics real. You can also arouse curiosity. So it's kind of like that board game Taboo. Have you ever played that? Where you have a card and there's a word you're trying to describe at the top of that card. But then there's a list of words that you cannot say when you're describing it. If you do, you're out. That's kind of a way to arouse curiosity here. And so an example is this past month, more than 1 billion people around the world skipped lunch every day. They ate no food of any kind and drank no liquid of any kind from sun up to sunset. And they did this every day during the month. They do the same thing every year. And this year, I did it myself. So why? Last month was a time for tending to the mind and the body and the spirit. Last month was the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. So today I want to tell you about one. See? Attention grabber. Now today I'm going to tell you about it. These are 4 higher level thinking ways of grabbing your audience's attention. This is your varsity. Here's your JV. They can work. And they can work well. But I want to give you some caveats, okay? The first is this. If you question your audience, make sure you're asking a question you don't know the answer to. So instead of, who in here likes food? If you ask a question you already know the answer to, you're going to get that response. People are going to look around like, does she want to answer? On the other hand, if you can ask a rhetorical question, do y'all know what that is? Like a rhetorical ocean?
You're asking a question that doesn't really need an answer.
Right. And the whole purpose of it is just to get you to think about it. So it might be, say y'all go to work this afternoon, and after you've worked all day, your supervisor comes up and says, hey, I'm gonna need your key and your badge. we don't need you anymore. Will you have enough money in your checking account to make it to the end of the month? That is a rhetorical question. And what that does is you're going, okay, wait a minute. I'm sitting on about 50 cents right now, but it's September 26th. So yeah, got it. Right? So rhetorical questions can bring your audience in by asking them essentially, what would you do if? And that's a really good way to just kind of invite your audience in. Be sure if you use a rhetorical question, you give them a chance to just kind of digest it for a second. Don't need a show of hands, but if you went into work and you were no longer needed, would there be enough money in your checking account to get to the end of the month? Sad fact is 80% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, which means at the end of their month, there's no money. So today, I want to share with you a few ways that you can get out of debt and provide enough money in your checking account in case those scenarios arise. I got to grab your attention first. You can also begin with a quotation. Choose your quotes wisely. Make sure you find who actually said it. Make sure it's not Merriam-Webster's dictionary. At this age, you'll need that. Unless you are actually defining a word that, most of us have never heard of, it really doesn't work well. It just doesn't read well. Last thing you can do is to tell a story. And I caution with this because you've got to fine tune that story. Because remember, your introduction, the whole thing is about 30 seconds. So there was a radio talk show guy, his name was Paul Harvey. And probably your parents or grandparents may have listened to him on the radio. But he would have a segment every Saturday called The Rest of the Story, where he would start to describe a significant historical event, like from the ground level. A lot of times we get descriptions of these historical events from a bird's eye view, but he'll go down to the ground level. So he'll take you to, it was a rainy night in Washington, D.C., and American Airlines flight, yada, yada, skids off of the runway and into the icy Potomac River. And only 3 people survived. But those 3 people changed the course of aviation. And when we get back from this commercial, I'll tell you the rest of the story. That's what he would do every time. And so you had to sit through the commercial because you wanted to know how they changed aviation. And so you'd sit through it, he'd come back, and he'd tell you the rest of the story. For those of you in here who are good storytellers, and there are a few of you, capitalize on this. You can set the scene in the introduction of your speech, kind of hold us in suspense for a second, and then go back to it in the conclusion. So one of my students did this once when she was giving a speech about texting and driving. It's her persuasive message not to do it. And she told the story of waking up one Saturday late at night to the screams of her parents who had just answered a phone call from a sheriff's deputy who was telling them that their son was in an automobile accident. They needed to go to the hospital. She remembers getting in the car with them, still wearing her pajamas. It's raining outside. They're driving as fast as they can. They're ushered through the emergency room doors, only to wait for another 3 hours before they'll know if he lives or dies. This was my encounter with texting and driving. I will never forget her telling me that, just right like that, just focusing like that. She said, and after I talked to you about the impact that had on my family, I hope to persuade you to put your phone away while you're driving. So she then goes through the statistics, which then in and of themselves, we hear them all the time, but does it really change our actions? Then she talks about a proposal that she wants to do for all teens to put their phones in their trunk while they're driving. And she talks about how it can work. And at the conclusion, she said, so that night when we went into the emergency room and we sat for 3 hours, we were the lucky ones. My brother only had a few broken bones, and within 3 months he was driving again. But what she did is she sandwiched her presentation. She put a frame around it that was a story. So y'all probably learned about frame narratives in English Lit, right? You've got your story, creates this frame, but then there's a story within it. So this is an excellent way to structure your presentation. But keep this in mind, your attention grabber should be so intentional because you're going to cycle back to that in your conclusion. So how you begin your speech is how you end it. So whereas the introduction has like 5 elements to it that you need to do, the conclusion only has 2. And that's to signal the end of the speech with a transition word. So, to wrap this all up, to summarize, to conclude, whatever it is. You're signaling verbally that you're ready to end the speech. Non-verbally, if you've wandered out here and you've shown us things on your slideshow, once you get ready to conclude, your body goes back home to wherever you started. So to wrap this all up, and then you'll have a reinforcement of your central idea. When you conclude your speech, a couple of things I want to tell you. No new information in the conclusion. Inevitably, you'll get your memory will come back to you, and you'll think, "Oh, I forgot to say this." And so you want to add a little bit of new information in there. Nah, it's not the time. Forget it. We'll talk about it later. So you just pretend like it didn't exist. Once you signal the conclusion, be brief. If you say you're going to do it, do it. So to conclude, there shouldn't be more than 20, 30 seconds after that. Have y'all been in an audience before where someone inevitably says, I'm not going to keep you too long? And what happens when somebody says that? They keep all day. Happens in church a lot. Whereas when they come up there and I'm going to give spiritual side, I'm not going to keep you too long. You will. Every time. Every time. This is why you've got to work that out. This is why your conclusion needs to be written out verbatim. I want it memorized. Just as close as you can. You still want to be conversational, but for this one presentation, I want that introduction and that conclusion not only written out, I want you pretty well memorized. So that middle stuff that you're talking about, you can look at your note cards. You're still having a conversation with us. But at the end of the presentation, when you are exhausted or just tired of it, you know a way out. And it's intentional. The last thing that needs to happen in that introduction is you need to circle back to your attention grabber. So if I started with suspense, I'm going to go back to that suspense, but I'm going to create a sense of safety. If I started with a statistic that was alarming, 80% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. In my conclusion, I'm going to go back to that statistic, but I'm going to try to make it hopeful. So now that you've listened to how to get out of debt, you can live like the 20% who are debt-free. If you begin with a story, close it up, or go back to one aspect of that story. But it should be hopeful. Your conclusion needs to end with hope, with positivity, rather than negativity. Studies show that if your message ends in negativity, the effect on your audience is one of despair. It's not one of remembrances, and it's certainly not one to produce change. We don't change with fear. We react with fear, and that's short term. So if you want to produce change, if you want to just give them something that they're going to think about, end with positivity, end with here's the reward of it. Going to conclude with a little listening. This is a story. This is a narrative. It's not necessarily an informative presentation or persuasive. It's simply meant to tell this guy's story. But the craft of it is beautiful. The meaning of it is beautiful. I want you to listen to the intro, how he keeps the movement moving throughout, and then how he goes back to that introduction in his conclusion, right? So this is from the Moth Radio Hour. Have any of you attended a Moth event? They have Moth speaking events all over the United States where folks are invited to tell their story. And it's usually centered around a certain theme. And so this was one of the years of, I think the Olympics were big or something. And so the theme of that Moth radio event were my Olympic moments. Okay, so I hope you enjoy this. Please. Pretty please.
Jesse Owens, Michael Phelps, and Chuck Upshaw. Jesse Owens ran so fast that in the 1936 Berlin Olympics, he wiped that smirk right off of Adolf Hitler's face. Michael Phelps, for the past 10 years, has been the fastest man in the pool. Now, those of you who are pretty perceptive and who've been paying attention have probably realized by now that I'm in a wheelchair. And I've been using a wheelchair since 1987. So I know some of you are thinking, there can't possibly be much in common between Chuck and those Olympians. Well, it started the day that my neurologist told me about a new medication for MS patients. A miracle drug, really. It was supposed to help MS patients walk 20% faster. And he asked me if I'd be willing to try it. 20% faster? Hell yes. Sign me up right now. What do I have to do? He said the only thing I had to do was to complete a 25-foot timed walk. Well, I understood what they were trying to do. They were going to establish a baseline. They were going to see how fast I walked before the meds and after the meds. 25 feet, I can do that in my sleep. 25 feet doesn't sound very far. It's the distance from here over there. Most of you could probably walk 25 feet in 6 or 7 seconds. It's not far unless you have multiple sclerosis. Then it feels like you're walking across the Sahara Desert. And that's how it turned out for me. Late one Friday afternoon in July, I took my walker to a neurologist's office and started to walk. The first 2 steps were great. I was strong. I was strong like a bull. That 3rd step started to get a little harder. And it got progressively harder the further I walked. By the time I finished, I was out of breath. And I was soaked through with sweat. My shirt was just wringing wet. And I asked the nurse how I did. And she told me. And I said, well, when can I start the medication? She said, Chuck, you can't. And this was the part that the neurologist had neglected to tell me. I had to walk 25 feet within a certain time period. And the time I walked was way, way, way slower than that. Well, this was one of those WTF moments. And I'll admit that I was probably using some of those ugly words. A time frame, it would have been nice if somebody had told me, but nobody did. At that point, I was furious. But I made a decision that I was going to show the insurance companies because they are the ones who had set that time frame. The insurance companies, the man. I was going to show them. The next day, I was going on vacation. And while I was on vacation, I walked 25 feet twice a day in the cool of the morning and the cool of the afternoon. And by the end of the week, I had knocked off 30 seconds. But that was still a long, long, long way from where I needed to be. When I got home, I wanted to continue walking, but I didn't have a place to walk. And for 2 or 3 weeks, I thought of where can I walk? Where can I walk? And it finally came to me. I had been a mental health therapist on the psychiatric unit of a local hospital, and they had a great long hallway, and I would walk there. The only problem was I didn't want anybody to see me walking. It was a pride thing, and I didn't want people to see me struggling and stumbling around. So I devised this great plan. I would only walk when patients were in treatment groups or at lunch and when staff were charting in the nurses' station. Well, that was a clumsy, slow, awkward way to do it, and my times weren't coming down. So finally, I decided that I only had one solution. I would come out. So one Monday morning in community meeting, that's when all the patients, the staff got together, I let people know what I was going to be doing, walk in the halls. And I let them know why. I needed to walk 25 feet in 45 to 8 seconds. Afterwards, 2 women came up to me and said they would like to help me. 2 patients. Linda said, "Chuck, what can I do to help?" Well, I don't ask for help very well, so I didn't have any kind of plan. Finally, I said, "Take my watch, walk down there to where you see that strip of tape on the floor. That's 25 feet. I will walk to you. I'll say, go when I start walking, and when I get to you, you stop timing me." Mary said she wanted to help too, but I didn't have anything for her to do. Now, Mary was a sister from Mississippi. So I said, "Mary, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go down there and stand next to Linda. I will walk to you, and we maintain good eye contact, and I want you to be my cheerleader." And I said, "Mary, I want you to pray for me." She said, "Chuck, I'll do that." So we walked for a week, nothing. 2 weeks, nothing. Finally, that 3rd week, when I got to the finish line, Linda said, "Chuck, 44 seconds. And Mary said, "Thank you, Jesus." And I learned 2 important things that day. One was how humbling it is to have people who have their own problems and struggles help you. The second thing I learned was how addictive speed can be. Because even though I had gotten within the time frame, I wanted my speed, my time to go down, 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 down. And it did. I kept walking. Patients kept helping me. Now, at the same time, we had on the unit a young woman who had been there 2 weeks, and she had been completely mute the whole time she was there. She had not said one syllable. No one had heard her say boo. I'm a pretty good therapist. I tried everything I knew how to do, and she wouldn't talk. One day before group therapy, she came into the group room with a legal pad and a pen, and she wrote, "Chuck, why is 30 seconds so important to you?" Well, I was stunned that she was communicating. But I told her about the medication. I told her about the time frame. I told her that mostly 30 seconds was important to me because I wanted to stick it to the man. She smiled, but she didn't talk. After about another week, her physicians thought that she should go to a longer-term hospital. On the day she left, her parents came to pick her up. They walked to the elevator. I rolled to the elevator and told her, "Thank you," and I would miss her. And as the elevator doors were closing, she looked up at me and said, "Chuck, I hope you get 30. The doors closed. Hey, wait, stop. But she was gone. Okay. My times kept inching down, slowly but surely. And I did get 30 seconds, and my time kept going down. These were my Olympic moments. It was about this time I realized that 25 feet really isn't that far if you have people helping you. The last time I walked was 3 days before I retired. The young woman who was helping me was 19, and she had more attitude than all of you put together. Okay? She started off the same way she did every time I walked. She said, "Ready, Chuck? Walk." And I walked. I walked as fast as I could. When I got to the finish line, she didn't say anything. She looked up at me, but she didn't say anything. Finally, I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Damn, Chuck." I said, "Walk, not run." She got up, walked slowly over to me, and showed me the stopwatch. 6.7 seconds. Life's a funny old thing. It's full of irony. The first time I walked, I didn't qualify because I was too slow. The last time I walked, I didn't qualify because I was too fast. Jesse Owens, Michael Phelps, and me.
Isn't that good?
Welcome to the Moth Podcast. I'm Anna Stern, your host for this episode. As the senior manager of the Moth's education program, one of the best parts.
There we go. All right, so for Tuesday, come to class with your introduction and your conclusion written out. I'm going to go over that. I want to make sure you're on the right spot. The second main point, I know you guys took the first main point home to go over that and write it on between Tuesday and today. The second main point is going to be your testimony, your specific experience with the problem. So I'm not going to insist, that you write that down verbatim, but I do want you to have that focus. Because when we get to talking about our testimony, a lot of times we can get into weeds. And we can talk about 100 different things. So how are you going to get that focus? What I'm going to check on Tuesday are the intros and conclusions, okay? So you're not going to have enough space here. So if you need a separate sheet of paper, or if you want to, type that out and just bring that to class, that would be fine. Probably preferred. I'd rather read that rather